Hello, this is Richard from animate.com, and this is an introduction to Erosion, an add-on for Blender 3D. First of all, we have to install it, so we go to User Preferences and Install From File. We'll look for the Python file in the pack and click Install. You see it's a modeling add-on. We just have to activate it, and it should appear in the Miscellaneous tab of the Tools panel. So right away we could generate a new landscape, which would be a basis to start working from. So after some 2 minutes of calculation, we have a generated landscape, which looks pretty convenient already. It also has some UV maps generated, which includes some properties of the landscape, like the sediment, how the sediment diverges over the landscape. Here's a set normal in the U component of the UV map. We will use this later on. Here's the flow and the gather, so how does debris flow down the landscape and where does it gather. Some thin flows for lava or rivers, as well as the divergence of these over the Z axis, and the top view, which is basically a UV map projection from top. If you have any textures, image textures, then you can easily project them downwards, while this top view also has a slight random distortion in the vertices stored in the map. So your textures will be slightly distorted and make a more natural effect than just projected from top view. If we apply a shader, we could use a pre-made shader, which are included in the pack. I will just append them. So I go to File, Append, and choose the Erosion's Materials Scene. Go to the Materials folder as it appears. Here we have different materials like the node group and the erosion texture material. I will take the node group, which has some gradient ramps that I can color, and to apply it to the landscape, I just select it and choose the erosion node group material. Right away I see some properties that appear. I can color the rock, which is done by a color ramp. So the colors from stone are varying over, let's have a look, what's the factor? Over the UV map of sediment. So the rock basically has these colors as the sediment of the rock changes. Then we have some dirt. Here we use the UV map of sediment as well. Then comes some flow. I use some grass colors here. No, that's not good, so let's render it in the viewport. To get better lighting, I right away change the lamp to a sun and turn up the intensity to 10 so that I get a more contrasting sunlight. And you see that the structures here are based on where the landscape has which topology. Of course, here everything is quite green. It looks like an Irish landscape, some hills in Ireland. We could easily change that by mainly changing the gather. So let's have a look here. Let's say this is quite stony, very grayish, and so yes, here we see a lot of gathering. And of course we could choose some crazy color for the rocks. like some brown sandstone color. Okay, so let's pretend that we're happy with it and we want to modify it now. Like for our final shot we would need some more detail, especially in the foreground. And for this we can still again use the Erosion add-on. Let's say this is our spot. I change the camera view by pressing 0 on the number pad and lock the camera to the view. Then I choose my point of view. I could also animate the camera, but I should do that before I apply the Erosion add-on, because camera animation will be recognized and will be an input value for the detail. So where the camera is, there will be more detail than in the background or far away from the camera. Let's have a look at the settings of the Erosion add-on. The steps is something like the centuries. So after a few centuries, after 5 centuries, landscape will look different. Based on the topology of your mesh, the vertices will be modified and flow downhill. So at the vertical areas where stuff is falling down far and quickly, there will be more modification of the landscape than at flat areas where it tends to flow very slowly. Usually 5 steps are okay. They will take a few seconds to calculate with a vertex count of 200,000, which is actually less because we have subdivision modifiers applied to it. That's been done automatically to make a smoother result. With rivers, we could choose the number of rivers. This could be up to 200. So we get a lot of small, long rivers flowing down. And the wind can be used to somewhat shift the flow along a certain direction. Here you can choose the angle and you see the values. A value of 0 here is a wind blowing along the x-axis. Then we have the option to optimize the mesh, which will change the topology. It will decimate the mesh and subdivide it again and displace it again, just to prepare it for a good calculation of the add-on. And chemtrack means that the foreground will be subdivided. It means that we have more detail in the foreground than in the background. So the mesh in the foreground and near the camera will be subdivided. This also holds for camera animation. If the camera is moving with keyframes, then the add-on recognizes that and follows the path in 10 steps, and at each step a subdivision will occur. Okay, so let's just erode it and have a look what happens. You can open the toggle view to see the progress. So here we see the landscape with more detail in the foreground and less in the background. Still there are some edges which don't look good, so the camera should avoid this area, but it can come close to the surface at this area. And you see a lot of more detail in the foreground, of course, while the background still saves some vertices. Of course, it's cool to use a sky as a background or environment. I simply choose sky texture and turn the intensity up to 5, so that shaded areas in the landscape will be illuminated a little bit. And then I add an atmosphere. I choose a cube, set it to the middle of my landscape, scale it up so that it surrounds everything. So you see it's surrounding everywhere. So I choose volume scatter as a volume shader with a slightly bluish color. It's offset to the blue direction, has a density of 0, 0. I think that's 1, 0 too much. Yeah, there we are. 0, 0, 5 behind the comma, and anisotropy of 0.5. And that's okay. That's from the new landscape generated by the Erosion add-on. Of course, this add-on is meant to modify your landscape, which you already modeled beforehand. And here we have a landscape I made before. It's very low poly, just a plane with subdivision and a few segments extruded, although it looks very blocky. To make it look more natural, I applied some modifiers. First, a subdivision modifier to make it a little smoother. Then I distorted this with a displacement to make it look more like stones. Again, I subdivided it one step and added smaller distortions. I just chose a cloud texture with a small size. And it's the same texture as in the first displacement, but here it has global coordinates. Subdivided again, you see the system is quite simple. Then I decimate to get a not so quadratic, not so orthogonal right angle topology. And already you can see some more organic looking topology on the mesh. Again, subdivided and displace it. So it's an iteration in this generation process of subdivision and displacement. Let's say this is our starting point. This is how we made our own landscape based from a very simple low poly model where we can define where the rocks are. So it's not any random result, but rather a custom landscape. We choose this mesh here in the add-on. To have all vertices being calculated, we need to apply all modifiers, which I'm doing right now by going through all of them and apply them so that they are more kind of baked into the mesh. So if I go to edit mode, I see all those small segments and not the low poly model anymore. It's 15,000 vertices. Choose an angle, that's my point of view, and I hit erode. Before that I toggle the system console because here will the progress of calculation of erosion be seen. So if I hit erode, I still can choose. You notice here are two icons of Blender, one of which is this system panel, and you see what the computer is calculating right now. First we made the subdivisions of the camera. Now we are changing the vertex positions over the centuries, and then some high quality modifiers are added. Okay, it looks a little bit more molten now, so you can see that the vertices tend to flow down. Also the foreground has slightly more detailed edges than the background. You see that here is a denser mesh than in the middle of your landscape. Alright. But how do we apply gradients now? Because we have a new material, let's say, diffuse texture. Let's open the node shader in a new window. To get a good shading of the landscape, we first have to generate maps. So we hit map, and again we see in the system panel how our progress is going on. Some decades of debris running down is being calculated, and then a few different steps of integration and the gathering is being calculated, and so on. It will take some time. Now we just have 16,000 vertices, which is not that much. You might want to have some 100,000 or 500,000, so it will take, go for a coffee meanwhile. It will take a couple of minutes to calculate that, up to 15 minutes. And we're done. You see the button is active again, or could be pressed again. So from now on we have UV maps generated here, which we can use in the shading. And to use a UV map, you, for example, could use an image texture. So let's choose a simple gradient texture, I would prefer. Let's use this map. You see it's very low pixel resolution and just some brown and sandy colors. But using the right UV map, you could make a quite complex structure onto the mesh. So I choose input UV map, and from the drop down list here I can choose for example the flow. In rendered view this will look like the following, and you see that our brown gradient texture, the image texture, is now being placed in a very unique way along the mesh, according to the dirt running downhill. Let's try another. Sediment will give you more information on the convexity, especially in the rocky areas. This will be helpful to get more contrast into the rocks and their topology. Then we have some set flows, thin flows. No, we can't use them. They won't look good with this topology. No, I don't like it. And the set normal, which is more or less like snow or rain or sand, simply falling down from top. So whatever is covering your landscape, the set normal, V height, UV map will be helpful. And the top view, as explained in the beginning, is just the texture being projected from the top. This will be good for grass textures or stone textures. So the flow is fine, I could use that, for example. But you get a rough understanding of what the UV maps actually are if you look at them in the UV map editor. So let's choose the Tunis map, the texture, and now I switch to edit mode. Let's go to solid display. I select all, then I see the UV map of the selected channel here. If I choose the U flow V gather, I get a structure which looks like it's very random, but actually each vertex is being precisely calculated along the x-axis, which is the amount of flow a certain vertex is going to have, and on the v-axis, which is the vertical axis of the map, the gather, how much will at this point debris gather. And therefore you can use a texture which has a very simple gradient from clean and untouched and new ground to a lot of debris, a lot of flow. So in 2 dimensions you can very good with a simple texture shade your landscape. This is basically it. Of course we have 2 pre-made shaders, one of which we have seen in the first landscape before. Let's quickly adapt that to this rocky scenery. I want to get rid of the green and make that some sandy texture, so I choose a bright yellowish color, and I want to have the rock darker and more reddish. Obviously we will need some offset here because I can't see the rock at all. So first of all I go to offset. Yes, now it's getting more contrasting. That's better. Let's leave it here. Make this one more red. Right. These are colors which fit into, I can't see them right now. I couldn't say where the dirt is and where the flow is and where the gather is, and that's exactly where we want to get if we don't want to make any alien landscapes. The colors should fit together so that it looks kind of realistic. Let's apply that and that. Right, here it is. We had 5 steps, so I smooth also 5 times. It sometimes is quite helpful to get the same repeat as the steps are. Okay. And I want to subdivide it more, so I want more detail. So I erode it again. This time I will optimize the whole landscape and limit it to 150,000 vertices. I can avoid the camera track. I don't need it because I already have a denser mesh in the foreground. And ridging is cool. Forest, no thanks, because it's canyons. No real trees will be here. Maybe I could use some for rocks, for small rocks which I scattered over the surface, but for now I just want to look at the calculation. I don't need the V groups because I already have some, and I don't need the high quality. So I just start to erode. And again, let's have a look at the progress in the window. So we're done. This is what it looks like right now. Let's have a look at the rendering of this. Can we quit the smoothing? No, we shouldn't quit the smoothing. The spikes are still too much. So you see, it's meant to be something like a modifier. So if you take erosion, you can act against it with a smooth modifier. And there is another shader in the material scene which we can append. It's a stone desert. If we choose this shader for the landscape, we have one gradient that we can choose to define the colors, and they will, let's have a look at render view. They already have a very complex shading system. Small stones which appear along the surface, as well as a flow node, which you don't want to have a look at that. Simply too many nodes. But again, you can define the colors with this gradient. As I change the flow value, for example, I see much more going on between the rock and the landscape. This is the gather color. So again, I start from clean areas which are untouched to eroded flow down to gathering in the end. And there is not so much detail here. if I would have zero flow, I still have some very... It's not as heavy as the other shader, so in some cases this might be the better solution for whatever you want to achieve. It's a simple way to color your landscape, so this is something like a simple shader compared to the other with 4 different color channels. So that's it. I hope you liked it. I hope you see the use for this add-on and all its possibilities it gives you, as it reduces your amount of time to the very basic shaping of your landscape, while the details are going to be automatically generated into your mesh, and they will still look like flowing down the surface. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I hope you liked it. Bye.